Welcome to the Fantasy Draft Weekly Rundown. Joining me as always is co-host and NFL Ironman London Fletcher. London, it always seems like guys come out of nowhere and emerge for gigantic Week 17s, as you know there are teams that have nothing to play for and teams that have already clinched. So that basically leaves the fantasy community's mouth watering over the offseason. You hear these guys talked about. Do you have any hunches as to who this player, this year may be?
Man, I don't necessarily say I would have a hunch, but I guess if I was to say maybe a possible player with Alshon Jeffrey being out for the Chicago Bears, maybe a guy like Joshua Bellamy. Last time Jeffrey was out, he ended up catching a touchdown pass. So he probably could be a guy who can be a sleeper in your play in your lineup this weekend. Joshua Bellamy. Somebody has to get those targets for the Chicago Bears. So he would be a guy I probably think maybe could kind of emerge as a productive player for you.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And like you said, he caught a touchdown all the way back in week 2, so he's definitely got a shot. And let me ask you a question, and I think I know the answer to this. But what teams should people be avoiding in week 17, if any, that have nothing to play for?
I, I would
Go ahead.
I would say Washington.
Yep.
Probably be a team to avoid just because they pushed the division already. They're not playing for anything. They're not going to move up or move down based on their performance against the Dallas Cowboys. So you got Jordan Reed, who's been phenomenal lately. Kirk Cousins, who's played extremely good football the last seven, 8 ball games of the year. So those would be guys that I would look to avoid because you just don't know how much those guys will play. Knowing that they have a playoff game next weekend. If I'm Jay Gruden, winning a game against Dallas, I mean, it's a big game in terms of rivalry, but big picture wise, it doesn't bode you well if one of those guys get injured. So I would avoid the Washington Redskins if I was looking at guys to avoid or teams to avoid rather.
Yeah, I thought that's where you were going. A, because you follow them closely, and B, because I think they're really the only team worth avoiding this week. They're really the only ones we know aren't going to go full strength. Besides
Right.
that, there are teams that have been out of it for a while, and really almost everyone has something to play for. You don't have any of those, 16 and 0
Yeah.
teams that have already clinched. So it's going to be an interesting week. Let's
Yeah.
get to the
Even if you look at teams like Carolina, Arizona, New England, all
yep.
those teams are still battling for either home field advantage or number 2 seed, number 3 seed, Cincinnati Bengals, Denver Broncos. So you have a lot of good football teams with good players or great players, even in some cases that they have to go out and play as play to win these ball games.
Yeah, I know in seasons past I've heard people worry that week 17 is going to be kind of a mess, and I would recommend people play this slate because it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be pretty close to your average NFL week. Let's get started with the picks. I'm going to start at quarterback with, you kind of said something, you alluded to the Carolina Panthers. I think Cam Newton's just fine now that they have something to play for. And he's really, the NFL's and fantasy's quarterback one until proven otherwise at this point. And they're still playing for that number 1 seed. They play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think people are going to look at that last matchup and worry that Cam was kind of average. But, that was all the way back. It was in the first quarter of the season. So you can't really, look back to that and say, okay, this is what he's going to do this time. And the
Right.
good news is they play at the same time as Arizona. Both of them are 3:25 Central kickoffs, so they won't know what Arizona's done, during their game. So they're going to have to give it a full go, and that's just bad news for Cam Newton's opponents. He's going to, be highly motivated. I know it's a good defense, but he can run, he can pass. I'm using Newton. Who do you like?
Hey man, first of all, nobody cares about Central Time Zone, man. Let's get that straight. Man, we play at 4:25 Eastern Standard Time. I don't care about Central Standard. So let's get that out of the way. For me, I like Big Ben Roethlisberger. To come back in the bounce back game. We saw the performance that he had against Baltimore last week. 2 interceptions, lost another fumble, only 6.8 fantasy points, man. A very unbend Big Ben type of performance. With that being said, they're still, they have to win this ball game against the Cleveland Browns in order to give themselves an opportunity, and they need they need the Jets to lose to make the playoffs. So I feel like the Cincinnati, I mean the Pittsburgh Steelers will go out and have a great game. Big Ben is going to have a great game. So look for him to produce at a high level. Get that ball to all those playmakers that he have at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think the Steelers, I didn't have them on my list for the podcast, but I think they're the best tournament stack out there this week because people are going to be worried about what they did last week. I know D'Angelo Williams had a big week, but Big Ben's going to come back this week. Antonio Brown disappointed last week. Martavis Bryant disappointed last week. I think they're going
Yeah.
to have a huge game. I agree with you. I think you can use all of them. Let's move on to the running back position. Again, I'm going chalk, and I promise I will switch it up. But Devontae Freeman, 14,300 on fantasy draft. The Saints are just a horrific defense. And I know a lot of people are going to be on Julio Jones because why wouldn't you be against this defense? We saw Allen Robinson toast them. But Devontae Freeman rushed for 100 yards on just 13 carries the first time. He had 8 receptions for 56 yards, and he had a touchdown in both the passing and running game. So despite the price, I think there's enough value this week with guys sitting that you could roster both Freeman and Newton and still have room to maneuver. And I think one of the ways you can do it is by going with, and I can't believe I'm mentioning this name, but Tim Hightower, a guy who kind of looked like his NFL career was over. He was kind of a journeyman. And I know he's playing in the same game as Freeman, but I mean, this is a guy who's just getting all the carries. He's the goal line back, which is huge. He's involved in the passing game, which is huge. And the Saints have allowed the first most fantasy points to the running back position. So I think, even though they're playing against each other, and that's kind of an unorthodox way to do it, I think you use both the running backs from this game. Who do you like?
Just to kind of piggyback on you as far as Tim Hightower is concerned, he was my teammate in Washington when he got injured, and before he got injured with the ACL injury, really productive running back, both as a runner and also catching balls out of the backfield. He ended up getting like a staph infection, and also in addition to the knee injury, so he really battled back to get himself back to where he's at. I'm very proud of him and his intestinal fortitude and really resiliency that he showed to be able to get back and play football. So my hat goes off to him. Running back that I love is D'Angelo Williams against the Cleveland Browns. You mentioned the stack with the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I'm stacking Big Ben. I'm stacking D'Angelo Williams with him. In addition to the yards, he had 100 yards against the Ravens last week on 17 carries, but I love the fact that he catches passes, 6 receptions, 53 yards. Last week, the week before, 5 receptions against Denver. So you look at him, us being a PPR league, the ability to not only produce in a run game, but also knowing that he'll catch 3, 4, 5 passes, maybe even 6 passes in a ball game. You have to love that. He had 2 touchdowns to go with that performance against the Ravens as well. So what's not to love with D'Angelo Williams against the Cleveland Browns? We all know how the Browns struggle in stopping running back. So that's my guy to go with in your lineup at the running back position.
So there you go. All three of our backs that we suggested are goal line backs. They'll catch passes out of the backfield, and they are getting a full workload, which is what you'd love to see for Week 17. That's all for the first half of the rundown. Stay tuned for the rest of it, including the questions, which you won't want to miss this week.